There's been panic on Wall Street after President Trump's new tariffs. Global markets and global leaders aren't happy. He tried to take on the world. Tonight we ask, how will the world hit back? Canada has already announced plans to retaliate as the UK, EU and China mull over their countermeasures. We'll take a wider look at Asia, where some of the biggest tariffs were imposed, and look at why it could drive up inflation. And how some of the world's biggest companies like Apple and Nike saw their share prices plummet. Trump's message tonight, don't panic.
It was an operation, like when a patient gets operated on, and it's a big thing. I said this would exactly be the way it is.
Also tonight, we investigate the rising number of aid workers killed in Gaza. The UN aid chief tells us it's time for accountability after almost 16 months of war.
What we're seeing at the moment is a situation in which the scale of this conflict, the ferocity of this military offensive, is being cheered on from some quarters.
Tom Fletcher singles out America as Israel's main cheerleader. That full interview coming up on tonight's The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. When does a trade war officially become a trade war? Well, according to some economists and governments, we're already in one. Canada says President Trump's new tariffs are just the latest blow in a fight that's been raging for some time. That fight just got a whole lot bigger, though, because last night, President Donald Trump took on the world, announcing tariffs on every country that exports goods to the United States. It was, in typical Trump fashion, an event made for TV.
First row, China, European Union, they're very tough. Vietnam, Taiwan, Japan, India, very, very tough. Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia. Oh, look at Cambodia, 97%. United Kingdom, 10%.
Well, the UK got off lightly there with 10% tariffs, and the Prime Minister remains hopeful of striking a deal to avoid it altogether. He was today being quizzed by our political editor, Beth Rigby.
For working people looking at all of this overnight, what does it mean for them?
A trade war is bad for working people. I think it is better if we're able to negotiate a better outcome.
Well, others are less fortunate. EU countries face a 20% tariff, and its leaders are threatening a massive response. It's a sentiment shared in Canada, which has revealed countermeasures.
Well, this is a tragedy. It is also the new reality. We must respond with both purpose and force.
There seems to be no order in the disorder, no clear path through the complexity and chaos that is being created.
Well, China says it's readying its response after being hit with a 34% tariff. We'll take a look at how countries in Asia and Southeast Asia are set to suffer. And it's not just countries, it's also the companies that manufacture there. The likes of Apple and Nike saw their shares nosedive today. That's because they manufacture huge amounts in the likes of Vietnam. Now, today, the message from the White House to Wall Street was, don't panic, trust in Trump. But just how much patience does the world have? The man himself spoke just a short time ago and played down the slump in the markets. Have a listen.
The markets today are way down, the worst day in years because of the tariffs. So how's it going? I think it's going very well. It was an operation, like when a patient gets operated on, and it's a big thing. I said this would exactly be the way it is. We have $6 or $7 trillion coming into our country, and we've never seen anything like it. The markets are going to boom, the stock is going to boom, the country is going to boom, and the rest of the world wants to see, is there any way they can make a deal? They've taken advantage of us for many, many years. For many years, we've been at the wrong side of the ball, and I'll tell you what, I think it's going to be unbelievable. The thing that people have to talk about, we're up almost to $7 trillion of investment coming into our country, and you'll see how it's going to turn out. Our country's going to boom.
Well, that was Donald Trump there. Let's just get a snapshot of how stock markets fell around the world, starting with Wall Street, which closed Not long ago, the S&P 500 index has plunged almost 5%, losing 274 points. The Dow Jones fell 1,700 points, or just under 4%. Here in London, the FTSE 100 touched a two-month low, closing down 1.6%. Elsewhere in Europe, Germany's DAX closed down more than 3%, as did France's benchmark index. In Asia, where some of the harshest tariffs are focused, Japan's Nikkei faces its worst week in nearly 2 years, dropping 2.8%, and Hong Kong's Hang Seng shed more than 1.5%. That's how the markets reacted. Global leaders angry too. France's president has called on EU countries to suspend investment in the United States to hit back at Donald Trump.
We must act sector by sector to ensure that future investments, or even those announced in recent weeks, are put on hold until things are clarified with the United States. Because what message would it send if major European companies were investing billions of euros into the US economy at the very moment that they're imposing tariffs on us?
Emmanuel Macron, well, let's get the view now from the United States and Brussels. How will all this go down, and what might Donald Trump rather do next? Let's bring in our correspondents. Adam Parsons is in Brussels, but let's go first to David Blevins, who joins us in Washington. I mean, David, it was quite a sight. Everyone was waiting for Liberation Day. 24 hours later, I guess, the world has realized this is a stunning shift in American economic policy.
Yes, a watershed moment without question for the global economy. And we've only had the first impact. The second will come when exactly we see how the rest of the world responds. But I think, Yalda, we've come full circle today. This morning, the President's press secretary, Caroline Levitt, went on the various news networks to say, trust in Donald Trump. She said there would be no pain for Americans, that wages would rise, but that prices for consumers would not. Then the markets opened in steep decline. Did that deter the president? Not one bit. He very quickly took to his own Truth Social platform to give that example, comparing his approach on tariffs to a patient having been through surgery, now recovering and on the road to recovery. And he has just reiterated that a short time ago, leaving the White House. He likes his analogies much as he likes his emotive language. So it's hard to know if he's just got his head in the sand or if he actually believes this is going to work. But what do Americans think? Well, there's another key figure doing the rounds today, 72%. That, according to the latest YouGov polling, is how many Americans believe these tariffs will result in increased prices for consumers here. So a degree of unity in terms of the impact, but certainly division in terms of the strategy, because Republicans are rowing in behind him like never before. And Democrats, predictably, are accusing him of triggering a global trade war with America's closest allies. And they say he is taxing just about everything consumers need in order to give his own billionaire friends a tax break. That's their view.
Yeah, David, as you say, I mean, lots of questions about how allies are reacting to all of this. Let's go to Adam Parsons, who joins us now from Brussels. And Adam, all day we've been hearing from European leaders who are angry, are reeling from this, coming to terms with the fact that there is a split in transatlantic relations. And it's almost like Donald Trump has been telling them and telling everyone else for the last 10 weeks throughout the campaign trail that I'm going to do this. And yet now that he has done this, there is shock.
Yeah, I think there is. And that is because this just hasn't happened before. I mean, the one thing that Donald Trump has done that's pretty hardcore is to unite just about all of Europe's major leaders, because they're pretty much all fed up with him. Whether that is the quite hard right, Giorgia Meloni, who cancelled all of her appointments today in Italy to try to get her head around what was happening, are the two much more liberal politicians. So you take Emmanuel Macron, your classic centrist leader, today saying effectively, let's hit Trump where it hurts, and that is by pulling out investment from the United States. But I think the European Union feels that it is a point where it almost has to define itself. Why do I say that? Well, because this is a trading bloc that feels that it is now time to make its punch. And it has looked at what has happened at the United States. I spoke to a pretty senior EU official today at some length. I mean, A, they think this is illegal. B, they think the methodology used by the Trump White House is complete nonsense. But C, they think that rather than putting in the kind of indiscriminate taxes that America is doing, they are going to be thoughtful. So here's what is going to happen. Next week, they'll propose countermeasures. And these are in relation to the steel and aluminium tariffs, the first things that America announced. Now, what might be on that list? Harley-Davidson motorbikes, soybeans. These are things that the Europeans say they're thinking strategically about, stuff they like, but which they can buy elsewhere. Their theme, Yalda, will be hit America where it hurts without damaging the European economy. So they take an example. They look at America and they say, you've put a tariff on coffee, on imports of coffee, something you in America cannot grow. That is, to quote somebody, stupid. You're doing the same thing with bananas. You're punishing poor countries who can't fight back. Whereas we, European Union, in their words, are going to think much more tactically. If there's stuff we really need from America, we might not put a tariff on that, but we will on other things. And one to look out for going forward. The EU has this thing called the anti-coercion instrument, which gives them pretty broad powers to retaliate if they think, effectively, a big bully trading nation is whacking them unjustifiably. That's what they think is happening now. The one to look out for is whether they end up taking reprisals against the big tech firms, the Googles, Amazons, Metas of the world, and whether those companies who are close to the White House then feel that pain. And look at their share prices today. Some of them falling 6-7%. There were some horrible declines on Wall Street. And as we know, if there's one thing that triggers through to Donald Trump's White House, it is angry business leaders and a falling stock market. And I think that is one of the things the European leaders would really like to see happen.
Indeed, extraordinary times. Adam, David, thank you both. Let's turn now to the impact of all of this on Asia and Southeast Asia. Countries there were hit with some of Donald Trump's heftiest tariffs. Among them, China, which is promising countermeasures to its new 34% tariff. That was on top of a 20% tariff it already faced. For more, here's our Asia correspondent, Helen Ann Smith.
A glimpse inside China's fast fashion workshops is rare. Places that cut and stitch and steam for a living. Thousands of items a day, fast, cheap, and destined for America. This type of operation has undercut US manufacturing for years, and it's now vulnerable. Workshops are based on streets like this, places that just feel ill-equipped to withstand what's coming. At least 54% taxes on all goods sent to America. Trade at that price is almost impossible. A massive market wiped out overnight. Their only answer, for now, we must look elsewhere.
Other places might have better business opportunities, right? For instance, Africa is always good. Anyone can survive without relying on just one other country.
At the end of the day, workers pour from the factories. The people really at risk. Millions here could be put out of work in an economy already struggling. Adverts for short-term contracts are a reminder. Many don't even have a stable job to lose. China has already vowed to respond. Earlier restraint now feels unlikely.
The unilateral tariff hikes by the US violate WTO rules, harm the common interests of people of all countries, and do not help solve the problems of the US itself. It is clear to everyone that more and more countries are opposing the US's unilateral bullying actions, such as imposing tariffs.
And the broader region is reeling too. Over 40% rates for low-income nations like Cambodia and Vietnam will hit especially hard. Many Chinese firms have relocated here to avoid American tariffs. Workarounds now not an option.
Authorities here now face a complex balancing act.
Further escalation will be costly and they can ill afford it, but they don't want to be seen to be weak. Behind the scenes, frenzied negotiations are no doubt underway, and some sort of grand deal is not impossible. But even if one is reached, China will have taken a lesson from today. The US is not to be trusted, and a further decoupling of the world's two biggest economies is almost certainly on the cards. Experts here say such an outcome might even be desirable.
The trade pattern between the United States and China is not going to be sustainable economically and politically. We're preparing for this, that we can't rely on the U.S. market forever. The party is going to end. This probably is going to end a little bit earlier than a lot of people expect.
Exports account for a fifth of China's economy. An ability to produce and to sell has always been its superpower. It is a behemoth that can adapt. The question is, how quickly? Helen Ann Smith, Sky News, Beijing.
Well, in the last few minutes, we gave you a sense of how the global markets were reacting to all of this. And the United States Dow Jones Index has just dropped 1,680 in its biggest fall since 2020. And that's, of course, following fears of a fallout from President Donald Trump's tariffs, and that's shaking the market. So a lot of volatility today as the markets react to this seeming trade war that Donald Trump has started through the tariffs. Now, let's just delve a little deeper into those regions that Helen Ann touched on and what the effects of the tariffs could be. It's clear that Southeast Asia is among the worst affected. Vietnam there with a 46% tariff and Cambodia a 49% tariff. It's sure to hit those countries hard, but also the global companies who've come to rely on doing business there and their customers. Vietnam's exports to the US are worth $142 billion, almost 30% of its GDP. That's because a whole host of businesses like Apple and Samsung manufacture their goods there and export to the United States. Today, Apple's share price dipped over 9%, wiping more than $250 billion off its value. Both Vietnam and Cambodia have strong links to the sports and fashion industry. Take Nike, for example. It makes half of all its shoes in Vietnam. Today, its shares dropped to values not seen since 2017. Adidas makes 39% of its footwear there, so Americans should get ready to see the price of their Nike and Adidas sneakers and clothing go up. Just take a look at some other companies and how tariffs will hit them. Lululemon, a growing sportswear brand, it makes 40% of its products in Vietnam and 17% in Cambodia. Gap, popular for adults and kids clothing, buys around 27% of goods from Vietnam. Abercrombie and Fitch gets 35% of its merchandise from Vietnam and 22% from Cambodia. These are just some examples of companies set to be hit that will in turn have an impact on the prices Americans and the rest of the world will feel on the high street. Well, quite extraordinary there as we see the impact on businesses and countries. Well, you're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come on the programme, don't go anywhere, how the small landlocked African kingdom of Lesotho ended up with the highest US tariffs. I'll speak to the Trade Minister next.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent.
It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century.
I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight.
We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record.
Sky News, the full story first.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Welcome back. Well, we're going to have plenty more on tariffs in a moment. But first, though, I just want to touch on another development surrounding Trump this week and his suggestion that he might seek a third term. It's, of course, unconstitutional. That's according to the American Constitution. But will that stop him trying? Well, me and NBC's Richard Engel discussed the idea of Trump seeking to stay in power for life on our podcast this week. Just have a listen. We know that he, admires these strong men globally. And so he looks at what Vladimir Putin is doing, what Xi Jinping is doing, what the likes of Erdogan are doing, Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey.
Yeah, well, you remind people what Putin did, because that's exactly what he did. He couldn't run for president any longer, so he ran on the ticket with Medvedev. So you tell people, it was an extraordinary thing. And it's become known among journalists as pulling a Putin.
Yeah, basically exactly that. In a time where Russia was sort of had their own limits in terms of how long you could serve, Vladimir Putin put his prime minister at the time, Medvedev, in as president, put himself in as prime minister, and then they switched roles, essentially. And this is basically what Donald Trump is alluding to. You can, of course, listen to the entirety of that podcast, The World, with Richard Engel and myself. You can get it anywhere you listen to your podcast, whether it's Apple or Spotify. And we have a detailed 40-minute or so conversation about what Donald Trump said there. He's often referred to the idea of a third term in a very joking way. He has said that others want him to do it, but it's not something he's necessarily thinking about. But he did talk about it in his first term as well. In 2018, he talked about how great it was that Xi Jinping had looked into becoming leader for life, which is, of course, what China's leader did. So you can listen more to that website. Let's return to our global look at how Donald Trump's tariffs are impacting the world. I just want to turn to the African continent now. Just have a look at some of the countries set to be worst hit. South Africa, 30%, Mauritius, 40%, and Madagascar at 47%. Lesotho was slapped with the White House's highest tariff rates on the list. People bringing goods in from the small southern African country will have to pay an additional 50% import tax. And what's particularly interesting about Lesotho is that it was one of a number of African countries that has benefited from sending goods, especially textiles, to America without having tariffs being slapped on them. That was due to an act brought in during the Bill Clinton era called the African Growth and Opportunity Act. It now exports some $237 million worth of goods to the United States. So how does the country feel now that it's dealing with effectively being accused of being ripped off, and how will it cope? I can now speak to the Trade Minister of Lesotho, Mokhethi Shelile. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us here on the programme. What on earth did your country do to deserve this?
I guess absolutely nothing. The Trump tariff it's a mixture of two things, as we have noticed. One is the WTO bound tariff, which is pretty high. It's not the applied tariff. We use what we call SACU tariffs. And if you look at the bound tariff from the WTO, the Lesotho tariff will be around 79.4%. But we are using, as I've said, the Southern African Customs Union tariff, which is on average, the weighted average of that is 7.5, I'm sorry. So I think the wrong statistics were used. Secondly, the other issue that we have realized is that the trade imbalance between us and the US, the difference was also a factor. As you have rightly pointed out, we were very successful exporting to the US relative to our size to that economy. And
I mean, it's
there has not been that
10%.
much.
It makes up 10% of your GDP. And I should remind our audiences, I mean, you're a tiny country, one of the poorest in Africa, and you benefited from this act that I talked about, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, something that the United States encouraged African nations to do. So in many ways, you were encouraged to have this relationship that turned into a dependency.
Yes, the African Opportunity Act came into existence in 2000. And when that happened, just prior to that, we had around 19,000 people employed in our textile industry. 3 years after that, we were well above 30,000. It went all the way to around 53,000. Now, those are small numbers by some other standards, but we are a population of 2 million here. So it makes a lot of a difference. So where we had a lot of people moving from the rural areas, women moving from rural areas, getting introduced to urban life, going to work, getting this knowledge of working industry and so on. So it has changed lives. It's been around for 20 years or so. And we are at a point where we think we're going to have to reevaluate our.
And what do you think you will do? Do you have a plan B for this? Because of course you also your second biggest trading partner is South Africa, but will you start to look for others? I mean, your main export here are diamonds and textiles. I mean, namely Levi jeans.
Yes. We first thing that we have to do that we're going to do quite quickly is to visit Washington and meet with the relevant authorities, the executive there, and we have to show them our case and make a case for Lesotho to be given its rightful tariff. We do understand that we have a new government in power in the United States with a different policy altogether, and we do not have a problem with. We just have a problem with being evaluated using the wrong tariffs. Like I'm saying, there are those WTO tariffs that are very, very high,
Do you think
which we're not
do you think they will listen to you?
We believe so. I believe there will be somebody to listen to us, because I've been made to believe that President Trump is a negotiator. He's open to sitting down, and then if we say here we are, this is the figures that we can talk about, much lower for American products that are coming into Lesotho.
Minister,
we expect that.
Minister, I just have a minute or so left, but I did also want to talk about another issue, because Prince Harry set up a charity, as you know, with a prince from Lesotho, and of course there is now a row that is underway between the chair of the charity and Prince Harry. But of course, this charity was helping a lot of children in Lesotho, namely around HIV/AIDS. Are you disappointed that it has, overshadowed the good work that the charity was doing in assisting these children?
Of course, definitely. That is a very disappointing news. We have quite a good number of AIDS orphans in this country. And that charity was doing wonderful work for our children. And it is a pity indeed that people in position of power can actually play the lives of the kids like this. It's very disappointing from the point of government and my personal view, of course.
Well, Minister, we're grateful that you've joined us tonight to talk about these issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, food rotting in trucks, desperately needed medicine thrown away. UN Aid Chief Tom Fletcher describes desperation in Gaza a month after aid was blocked.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome back to the programme. And now, of course, President Donald Trump has been speaking throughout the day. He's also been speaking in the last few minutes. He's travelling back or on his way, rather, to Florida from Air Force One, and he's made a few remarks. He's been asked about the tariffs and the markets, and he said that the operation is now over and it will settle in. Of course, he also spoke about the fact that, the whole system is like a patient that is ill and it's being revived. But he also said that he would consider a deal where China approves TikTok sales in exchange for tariff relief. So we're seeing Donald Trump there trying to use these tariffs as a bit of leverage. So he says he would consider a deal where if China approves the sale of TikTok in exchange for tariff relief. Of course, we still haven't heard a response from China about the kind of countermeasures that they would be imposing based on what Donald Trump has announced in the last 24 hours. He also says that he is open to tariff negotiations if other countries offer something phenomenal. He says that he will use tariffs as a bargaining chip, and he's open to negotiating, and it depends on what the other countries offer. So we're just speaking there to the Trade Minister of Lesotho, who said that he and the team and their country, they're going to make their way, the leadership of the country, to Washington because they believe they can go there and negotiate a deal, and no doubt there will be other leaders trying to do the same thing. Donald Trump spoke a little bit about Elon Musk as well. He said that he can stay for as long as he wants, but may depart in a few months' time. And of course, that news came out in the last 24 hours that Elon Musk was looking to step down from his position in Doge, where he has been shaking up the federal government. And Donald Trump has said that he can stay for as long as he wants. So clearly there hasn't been any kind of falling out between the two men, but he understands that Elon Musk may depart in a few months' time. Donald Trump talked more on the tariffs, and he says that the United Kingdom is happy about the US tariff treatment. And we've been hearing that kind of sigh of relief here in Westminster as well. And Beth Rigby, our political correspondent and editor, spoke to Keir Starmer, and they talked about potential countermeasures, but Donald Trump said that the UK was happy about the tariff treatment. Now, I just want to turn this to the situation in Gaza. The health ministry there says Israeli airstrikes today have killed at least 100 Palestinians across the Gaza Strip, among them at least 27 people, mostly women and children, sheltering at a school in the north. It comes after Israel stepped up its offensive to put pressure on Hamas, and that offensive is killing an increasing number of aid workers. Sky News analysis shows the recent deaths of 15 humanitarian workers whose bodies and ambulances were buried in the sand are part of an increasing pattern. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has this report.
The Gaza ceasefire meant that aid agencies could increase their work. Its breakdown and a newly expanded Israeli offensive has meant that they themselves have come under increasing attack, according to analysis from Sky's data and forensics unit. The aftermath of one incident. This is the mangled remains of an ambulance, part of a convoy of Palestinian Red Crescent and UN vehicles. 15 people died here on the 23rd of March. Satellite imagery shows that military vehicles had been in the area between the 18th and 26th of March. Tyre tracks and groundworks likely caused by vehicles are visible where the alleged incident took place. When other aid workers eventually reached the site days later, they were able to dig out the ambulances, along with the bodies. The Israel Defense Forces, IDF, said it had not randomly attacked an ambulance. A spokesperson said troops opened fire on suspected vehicles and killed Hamas operatives, although he did not provide evidence. One weapons expert told us that the vehicles seen in the UN footage did not appear to show signs of blast or shooting damage and had certainly been crushed.
One of the things that we haven't been able to do to the same extent as in the past is actually work with the Israeli authorities to do what we call deconfliction, which is to try to make sure that humanitarian convoys are clearly notified and avoided. Now, that wasn't always happening in the past, but it certainly isn't happening now.
This is where the convoy was hit. It happened before this evacuation zone was announced by the IDF. There are other incidents too. This was a strike against a building belonging to the International Red Cross, again outside the evacuation zone for that time. There were no injuries, and the IDF has said it incorrectly identified the building. And there are other attacks verified by Sky News. One on a UN compound, killing one and injuring others. A strike that killed a Médecins Sans Frontières worker, and another strike that killed a volunteer for World Central Kitchen. The IDF did not respond to our questions on those incidents. Take those, add in others we have verified, and the death toll for aid workers has been rapidly mounting. At least 29 aid workers were killed or injured in the 2 weeks up to March the 27th, the highest casualty rate in almost a year. As Israel's campaign in the Strip expands, aid is even more vital and even more perilous. Tom Cheshire, Sky News.
Well, this week I spoke to the UN's aid chief, Tom Fletcher. He described how his staff had been pulling fellow workers out of shallow graves this week after being killed in the fighting. He also demanded more accountability from Israel. Have a listen.
This is one more horrific tragedy among so many in Gaza. And I was there just a few weeks ago. At the moment when we were getting aid in, we were about halfway through the ceasefire, and we were saving many of the survivors. We were getting food and medicine and shelter to those who so badly need it. And of course, now we've been a month since that ceasefire ended. And in that time, the food is rotting at the borders, the medicine is going out of date. We can't get those support to people who are in desperate, desperate need. And as you described there, my colleagues were pulling the bodies of medics out of shallow graves in Gaza over the last few days. I've just come from a telephone call with one of my colleagues who was there doing exactly that. And these are horrors, and they're happening before our eyes right now.
Have you spoken to the Israelis about this? As we said, the IDF issued a statement. They say they were targeting Hamas operatives, that the vehicles look suspicious. And as far as they're concerned, they killed Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists.
The risk of these kind of attacks against humanitarians, let's be clear, these are ambulance drivers. They're the people who go back towards the survivors in order to try to save them. All we can do, we carry on. We try to deliver for the survivors. We try to get as much aid in to those who need it. And we demand accountability. We demand answers, and we call on the international community, the Security Council and others, anyone who still has any influence at all over Israel, to insist that this must stop.
But you're not getting accountability or answers in this moment. And certainly the United States isn't holding Israel accountable.
No, quite the opposite. I mean, if anything, what we're seeing at the moment is a situation in which the scale of this conflict, the ferocity of this military offensive is being cheered on from some quarters. And those parts of the international system that are trying to stand up for humanitarian law, for human rights, are being themselves attacked for doing that. So it's a pretty desperate moment. And it's not just a desperate moment for the civilians of Gaza, although they are really at the epicenter of the humanitarian crises that are rattling the world right now. It's a huge setback for international law, for the scaffolding, the laws that we created as an international community to try to protect the most vulnerable people. And those are being trashed right now.
Well, we know that the Trump administration has made it clear that they don't want to adhere to these laws, even though these systems were built by the United States 80 years ago. But are you disappointed in European leaders who are still talking about the importance of adhering to values, to international law, to the protection of humanitarian workers? And yet, when it comes to the situation in Gaza, there is frankly, silence. I mean, every now and then there is condemnation, but there doesn't seem to be any real leadership coming out from the Europeans either.
Well, I think it's fair to say that there's silence, actually. I was in the Security Council last week, briefing them on the situation in Gaza, and there was unequivocal condemnation from 14 of the members of that Security Council around the table.
So I guess this is the question. Is it enough? Is what they're saying enough? Are the condemnations enough?
Well, clearly not, because the attacks on humanitarian workers are continuing. And it's not just in Gaza, of course. We've lost 84 humanitarian colleagues in Sudan, for example. As I say, last year was the deadliest year on record to do humanitarian work. Now, we'll carry on doing that. I couldn't restrain my people, if I wanted to, from going back towards the survivors of these conflicts, of these crises, to try to help them, to try to save those lives. But it's a pretty appalling situation when I can't guarantee their safety and when I can't turn to the international community and insist that they do.
You just said there that in some quarters we're seeing the cheering on of the ferocity of this. Which quarters and exactly who?
Well, I think America has made clear that its support for Israel at this moment is unequivocal, and that there isn't a message of restraint, as there might have been, as there certainly was. I've worked on the Middle East for 20, 30 years now, and there normally was a message of restraint from Washington. Now, that's not happening right now. And that's not to say that there shouldn't be an effort to get the hostages back. There certainly should. I went to Nir Oz kibbutz myself just before going into Gaza. I met the survivors there. 1 in 4 people there were killed or taken hostage. So I completely understand the desire to get the hostages out, to get them home. But the ferocity of this military offensive is not the way to do that. The negotiations were working. The ceasefire, and we were very involved in getting those hostages out in that period, was working. We were getting people home to their loved ones.
And now, as you say, a month ago, this ceasefire broke down. Many people weren't surprised by that. Donald Trump himself talked about the fact that he was the one that pushed this and got this over the line. And I was in Doha when Steve Witkoff was there, and the Qatari Prime Minister said that we hope and look forward to the different phases of this ceasefire. And not only has the ceasefire broken down, but for the last month or so, the UN is saying that the aid is not getting in. There is no food or humanitarian assistance being allowed into Gaza. Israel says, that is not true. There is sufficient food going into Gaza. Your reaction, response to that?
So it's true that during that ceasefire period, we were getting huge amounts of aid in, and we reached 2 million people. We saved hundreds of thousands of lives in that period, 600 trucks a day, 20,000 trucks overall. This was enormous amounts of aid. And much of that aid now is on the verge of running out, because it has been a month since we were allowed to get aid in. We've been stopped from delivering aid. We've been told that we're not allowed to deliver that aid. And so there's only a fraction, a tiny, tiny fraction of what is needed to stop massive starvation and disease in Gaza right now. It's happening in front of our eyes, and we're demanding that access and we're not getting it.
Are they giving a reason as to why they're not allowing you in, why you've been stopped?
They're saying that they want to completely control the delivery of aid right now, but they're not saying it to us, but elements of the Israeli cabinet are saying out loud that this is to put more pressure on Hamas to release the hostages. So they're saying that it's a deliberate strategy of withholding aid in order to get the hostages released.
Are you saying that then there is a deliberate starvation of the people of Gaza?
This is what the elements of the Israeli cabinet have been saying, that this is a deliberate policy of withholding aid in order to put pressure on the people of Gaza, but ultimately on Hamas.
I just want to move your attention to another major humanitarian crisis, which is, of course, Sudan. We're nearing the 2-year anniversary of that conflict. We know the military has taken over large parts of Khartoum, but the peril, the danger, the humanitarian crisis for the people of Sudan is not over.
Absolutely not. And if Gaza is noteworthy for the concentration of the killing, the intensity of the killing, Sudan is noteworthy for the scale of the death and destruction. We need to reach 30 million people right now, but also the savagery of the violence that the Sudanese people have experienced, including, as I heard from so many survivors, just appalling sexual violence that's been used as a weapon of war in this conflict. What we need is an end to the war. We need the parties to stop this conflict. And for that to happen, we need a proper, consolidated, regional and international approach to peacemaking here, to basically saying enough is enough.
You're on your way to Myanmar. Obviously, we've seen the devastation there with the earthquake in that country. And obviously, this points to the fact that a country that is closed off, that is a military dictatorship, makes your job that much harder in accessing the most needy.
We need to get food, shelter, medicine in. We've got 25 search and rescue teams on the ground already. We're working with the regional parties as well, who are delivering a lot of in-kind support. But we've got to get in there and save as many lives as we can.
That was the UN's aid chief, Tom Fletcher there. Well, let's return to the subject of President Donald Trump's tariffs. Wall Street had suffered its worst day since 2020. We've also heard about the impact in Asia, Europe and Africa. The shock is truly global. So how will it affect supply chains? Well, with me now is Kevin O'Mara, co-founder and chief research officer at 0100, which works for a carbon-neutral supply chain. Thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us here on the programme. I mean, this is the unravelling of a system that has seemingly worked for decades, and many countries have tied themselves to it. Just help us understand what this moment means and the intensity of it.
It's 30 years, at least, of investment, big capital bets by big companies all over the world to try to, distribute manufacturing and logistics and sourcing as cost effectively as possible. And to unravel that at this sort of sudden change of the rules is really complicated. So, the challenge for chief supply chain officers with whom we work and the data that we generate is to help them solve these problems. They're being asked to kind of re-engineer this global network of factories and, logistic systems and shipping systems, kind of, on the drop of a dime here. So it's pretty challenging.
Help us understand practically what that means. So say, for example, an iPhone, does it suddenly double in price, or a garment? How does it affect the consumer, the average person?
Well, the initial effect of tariffs is likely to be raising prices. It's pretty difficult to imagine taking 20%, 30%, 46% in the case of Vietnam, and not somehow passing that on. And even if you can work your way around it, which, let's say Apple, who's very, very much exposed to Vietnam, they can do some things to get around it, a little bit of shipping ahead of time before the tariffs take effect. But the prices will rise until you can re-engineer your way out around it. So the practicalities are, how do I scale up manufacturing in a new location in the United States, if you want to follow the mandate of what these tariffs are all about? And that takes many, many years. It's not just one factory. An iPhone doesn't come from a factory and then everything behind that is raw materials. It's a factory fed by other factories, fed by other factories. And those factories are very large capital investments to stay in place for a long time. So unraveling that for Apple to practically make the move to the United States, they can try really hard, and it still cannot happen in less than, frankly, years.
And they obviously need to pass on the cost of that to the consumer eventually.
To a large extent, I will say supply chain executives are pretty focused on just trying to do the right thing, deliver what they promised as efficiently and safely as possible. They'll work with their suppliers and say, can you help me absorb some of this? They'll try to find other ways to find other sources of supply. They try very hard to minimize the impact on the customer because no one wants to pass that cost on. But at the end of the day, there is cost, and all the efficiencies of that 30-year-old global supply chain are going to be lost to the extent that you drive your way out of this and reconfigure supply chains locally. So the cost does go up.
Kevin, I have about a minute to go, but are you surprised by what you've seen unfold, given Donald Trump has been saying this for years now?
No. Donald Trump's been perfectly clear, and I think it's something that has been telegraphed unambiguously all along. The thing is, the idea that we want to reestablish manufacturing, that goal, is an ambitious goal and one that I think he's been very clear about. It's not that simple. There's a lot of skill that needs to develop, a lot of money that needs to be spent, and it won't be quick or easy. But we shouldn't be surprised. He told us this was what was going to happen, and here he is doing exactly that.
Yeah, absolutely. Kevin, thank you so much for helping us unpack all of those details. Well, we're just going to show you some live pictures of Air Force One, where President Trump has been speaking from about tariffs in the last half an hour, also saying that he is happy to negotiate with countries if they have some kind of remarkable deal to offer him. So we'll leave you with these images of President Trump arriving there in Florida, getting off Air Force One. Good night for now.